Part 1. A Painful Past. The scent of roses lingered in the air, blending with the soft glow of hundreds of flickering candles on lavish banquet tables. The grand hall was steeped in romance, yet for Cecilia Lancaster, it was nothing more than a fleeting dream, beautiful but too short-lived. She stood before the mirror, her fingers gently grazing the delicate fabric of her pristine, white wedding dress. A sheer veil draped over her slender shoulders, masking the emotions swirling in her eyes. Today she was getting married, a decision made in haste, but one she believed love would justify. Before her, clad in an elegant black suit, Ethan Carter gazed at her with a look that was both resolute and complicated. He was not the man her parents had envisioned for her. He did not come from a distinguished family, nor did he possess vast wealth, only empty hands and an unyielding ambition. But she loved him. She loved his confidence, his determination, and the way he looked at her as if she were his entire world. Her parents vehemently opposed their union. "He's only using you," her mother had said, eyes burning with fury. "What can a man like him, with nothing to his name, possibly offer you besides hardship?" But Cecilia defied them all. She believed in their love. She believed that as long as they had each other, nothing could tear them apart. They got married. The early days of marriage, love or illusion. At first, life was filled with happiness. Cecilia loved waking up in Ethan's arms, loved the way he kissed her forehead, with his eyes still closed each morning. Their small apartment was modest but always echoed with laughter. Their dinners were simple but warm, their evenings spent curled up on the sofa, content just being together. But then reality began to seep in. Ethan threw himself into work, spending long hours at the company and returning home past midnight. Exhaustion etched into his face. Strange phone calls, unexpected messages at odd hours. When she asked, he would only offer a faint smile. "It's just work. Don't overthink it." Cecilia tried to trust him, but the loneliness of empty nights began to weigh on her. Then the rumors started. A photo surfaced. Ethan in an upscale restaurant with another woman. Cryptic text messages she had glimpsed by accident. Malicious whispers from those around her. Doubt crept in. One day Cecilia found an unfamiliar envelope left on her desk. Inside, each photograph was like a razor slicing through her heart. Ethan, the man she had fought for, the man she had defied everything to marry, was with another woman. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the images. She tried to convince herself that it was all a misunderstanding. But then, an audio recording surfaced. His voice, unmistakable, echoed through her phone. "I never truly loved her." She collapsed onto the floor, her entire world shattered. She couldn't take it anymore. That night, when Ethan walked through the door, Cecilia was waiting. In the dim light of their apartment, her eyes reflected an unbearable agony. "Let's get a divorce." Ethan froze. A silence stretched between them, suffocating and endless. Then he chuckled, but it was the coldest laugh she had ever heard. "Are you sure?" She nodded, swallowing back her tears. He stared at her for a long moment before finally lowering his gaze to the divorce papers on the table. He picked up the pen, his expression unreadable, and signed his name. When he looked at her one last time, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "One day you'll regret this." A warning, a promise. Then he walked away. No explanations, no final glance. He simply left her standing in the dark, her heart shattered beyond repair. After that fateful night, Ethan Carter vanished from Cecilia Lancaster's life as if he had never existed. No messages, no traces, his presence wiped clean. The small apartment where they had once lived remained abandoned, and his startup company disappeared from the list of rising businesses. Cecilia assumed he had left the city, perhaps to start anew somewhere far away. She told herself it no longer mattered, yet deep down, a part of her always wondered, where was he now? Did he ever think of her? In the months following the divorce, she buried herself in work, in lavish parties her mother arranged, in meetings with men deemed suitable by her family's standards. But it was all a meaningless charade. No one could make her feel whole the way Ethan once did. Night after night, she awoke from dreams of him, her hand instinctively reaching for the empty space beside her, only to find nothing but cold emptiness. She despised herself for still holding on to his memory, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't erase him. Time passed, and Cecilia finally accepted the truth. Ethan was truly gone. 3 years later, the name Ethan Carter resurfaced in the headlines. But this time, he was no longer an ambitious young entrepreneur. He had become a formidable CEO. The company he had founded, Carter Enterprises, had exploded onto the market, rising to become one of the fastest-growing financial and investment conglomerates. His photographs graced the covers of prestigious magazines. A man clad in an impeccably tailored black suit, his gaze sharp and calculating, exuding an aura of absolute power. Cecilia couldn't believe her eyes. Ethan, the man who had once been her husband, had now become one of the most successful businessmen in the city. But what pained her the most was not his success. It was the transformation in him. The man who used to hold her in his arms at night, whispering tender words of love, now appeared cold and emotionless, as if he had completely erased their past. The press hailed him as a genius in the business world, but they also didn't forget to mention the rumors. Ethan Carter was a ruthless CEO who never showed mercy to his rivals. Cecilia couldn't help but wonder, had he changed, or had this always been his true self? As Ethan rose to new heights, Cecilia's family business, Lancaster Group, was crumbling under the weight of crisis. Her father, William Lancaster, had once been a seasoned businessman, but in recent years he had made a series of reckless decisions, placing his trust in high-risk projects and unreliable partners. Cecilia had warned him countless times, but his pride was too great to listen. He believed that the Lancaster name would never falter, that their legacy would remain untouchable in the business world. But reality was far crueler. Failed investments piled up. Rumors about the company's financial instability spread like wildfire. Stocks plummeted. Then came the final blow. One of their largest projects, into which her father had poured everything, was abruptly canceled. Lancaster Group stood on the edge of bankruptcy. "This is impossible. Lancaster Group has been around for over 50 years. We can't collapse overnight," Cecilia murmured, staring in disbelief at the glaring red numbers flashing on the stock market board. But the truth was undeniable. Without an immediate massive influx of capital, Lancaster Group would soon cease to exist. Her father, once so proud and invincible, now sat in his office, his hands trembling as he stared blankly at stacks of debt-ridden documents. Cecilia clenched her fists. She could not let her family fall. But who had the power to save Lancaster Group now? She didn't have to think for long. One name surfaced in her mind, the name she had tried to forget for the past 3 years. Yet now it was the only one that could pull her back from the abyss. Ethan Carter. Part 2. An offer she can't refuse. Rain drizzled over the bustling streets of New York City. Neon lights reflected off the slick pavement as luxury cars glided past, leaving streaks of brilliance in the night. The air was crisp, the early winter breeze carrying a damp chill that clung to the glass of the black Bentley where Cecilia Lancaster sat. Her fingers tightened around the door handle, her gaze locked onto the towering skyscraper before her. Carter Enterprises. His name. The high-rise loomed over the city, its glass windows reflecting the brilliance of the skyline, exuding a presence of dominance and prestige. At the top, the bold steel emblem, CE, stood like a declaration to the world. Ethan Carter had conquered this place. Taking a deep breath, Cecilia stepped out of the car. The sharp click of her heels against the cold marble entrance echoed in the vast space. Inside, the grand lobby of Carter Enterprises was a vision of sleek elegance. Deep gray and black tones, towering glass walls and chandeliers that cast a crystalline glow. The employees in tailored black suits moved with precision, their hurried steps never faltering. Here, efficiency and speed were paramount. Cecilia approached the reception desk, her voice steady. "I need to see CEO Ethan Carter." The receptionist, a blonde woman in a refined uniform, lifted her gaze, cool blue eyes assessing Cecilia for a brief moment. "Do you have an appointment?" Cecilia clenched her fist. "Tell him Cecilia Lancaster has an offer." The mention of her name caused the receptionist to pause. Her eyes widened, just for a second, before she quickly masked her reaction and picked up the phone. The lobby buzzed with the rhythmic sounds of ringing phones, high heels clicking, and murmured conversations. But Cecilia could only hear the pounding of her own heart. Moments later, the receptionist set the phone down and offered a polished smile. "Mr. Carter will see you, 50th floor." The elevator doors slid open, revealing a vast corridor lined with glass panels that overlooked the city's dazzling skyline. Everything here was the opposite of Lancaster Group. No traces of classic heritage or tradition. Instead, it was modern, ruthless, and efficient. The CEO's office door was slightly ajar, offering her a glimpse of the man she once called her husband. Ethan Carter stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands in his pockets, his imposing frame silhouetted against the city lights. His white dress shirt stretched perfectly over broad shoulders, the black suit jacket casually draped over a leather chair behind him. The office itself was immaculate, mahogany desk polished to a sheen, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with documents and prestigious awards. Power and control radiated from every corner, yet there was a chilling absence of warmth. Then he turned. His cold, piercing gaze landed on her. Cecilia Lancaster. His deep voice was steady, devoid of any emotion, as if her name were nothing more than a faded memory. Cecilia inhaled sharply and stepped inside. "Ethan!" He tilted his head slightly, assessing her. There was no tenderness in his eyes, no remnants of the man who once held her close. Instead, he looked at her like a man who had once been betrayed and had grown too powerful to be hurt again. Slowly, he moved toward his desk, his voice unreadable. "The last time we met, you slid divorce papers across the table without hesitation." He paused, a smirk ghosting over his lips, devoid of warmth. "What brings you here now?" Cecilia's fingers curled into her palm, her heart aching. "I need your help." The air grew unbearably still, the ticking of the wall clock the only sound between them. Ethan leaned against his desk, arms crossed, his gaze unreadable. "Help? What is it this time? Has the mighty Lancaster family finally fallen?" Cecilia bit her lip. He knew. Of course he knew. She had no choice but to lay out the truth. "Lancaster Group is on the verge of bankruptcy," she admitted. "My father made the wrong decisions, and now we need an investor." Ethan let out a dry laugh, pacing toward her, his every step deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. "How ironic." His voice was smooth but sharp. "The woman who left me, who once believed I wasn't good enough, is now standing in my office asking for my help?" Cecilia met his gaze without faltering. "I'm not asking," she said calmly. "This is a business proposition." Ethan stopped right in front of her, his dark eyes unreadable. Then slowly he spoke. "I'll help, but on one condition." The atmosphere tightened. Cecilia's pulse quickened. "What condition?" Ethan's stare was as cold as ice. "Marry me, again." Cecilia stood frozen. "What?" she whispered, certain she had misheard. Ethan's lips curled into a slow, dangerous smirk. "You want to save your family?" he murmured. "Fine, but you'll be my wife again, and this time, I'll be the one in control." A chill ran down her spine. The man standing before her was no longer the man she once loved. Cecilia sat across from Ethan Carter in his penthouse office, a grand space overlooking the city skyline. Between them, a sleek ebony desk reflected the soft glow of modern ceiling lights, but all she could feel was the suffocating chill in the air. In front of her lay a thick document, bound in black leather with the words "marriage contract" embossed in silver. She didn't need to read it to know. This was no longer a marriage built on love. This was a deal, a binding agreement, a transaction. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. A silver pen twirled between his fingers as his deep voice cut through the silence. "You're free to read it carefully if you wish, but if you want to save your family's company, you have no other choice but to sign it." Cecilia inhaled sharply and flipped the pages. Each clause felt like a verdict, sealing her fate. This marriage is legally binding and cannot be annulled for the first 3 years. Ethan Carter has full authority over the marriage, including decisions regarding residence, Cecilia's employment, and personal associations. Cecilia cannot unilaterally leave the marriage. Any violation of this clause will result in severe legal consequences. All shared assets, including those Cecilia owned prior to marriage, will be managed by Ethan Carter. The marriage must be publicly acknowledged in the media and at social events. Cecilia is prohibited from engaging in any relationships outside the marriage. Her chest tightened as she scanned the words. This wasn't a marriage, it was a cage. She lifted her gaze to Ethan, searching his face for anything, a flicker of hesitation, a trace of the man she once loved. But there was nothing. Only a cold, unreadable man who had locked away all vulnerabilities, leaving no room for defiance. She swallowed hard, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. You really want to control me this much? Ethan's expression didn't change. Last time, you walked away too easily. This time, I won't give you that option. Her heart clenched. She bit her lip, tasting the sharp tang of blood. And if I refuse? Ethan's lips curled into a smirk, one that sent a chill down her spine. Then tomorrow Lancaster Group will officially declare bankruptcy. And you know how corporate collapses work. Thousands of employees will lose their jobs. A threat, a merciless, undeniable truth that cut through her like a blade. Cecilia knew she had no choice. Her hands trembled as she picked up the pen. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking a deep breath and signing the final page. Her name stood stark against the white paper, the end of her freedom and the beginning of a marriage she could never escape. Ethan took the document, his eyes flickering darkly for a brief moment before returning to their usual indifference. He rose to his feet, adjusting the buttons on his suit jacket, his voice as composed as if they had just concluded a business deal. Good, the wedding will be this weekend. Cecilia's breath hitched. That soon? Ethan raised a brow. Or would you rather I change my mind? She bit her lip, forcing herself to remain silent. She had no say in this. The ceremony was extravagant, a spectacle fit for royalty. Ethan Carter played his role flawlessly, the perfect husband in the public eye. His arm resting lightly on Cecilia's waist, his gaze brimming with affection whenever cameras were pointed at them. The press dubbed them New York's most powerful couple, their reunion painted as a grand romance straight out of a fairy tale. But only Cecilia knew the truth. It was nothing but a perfect lie. And when the bedroom door shut on their wedding night, the illusion shattered. Ethan stood before the mirror, loosening his tie, his voice detached and cold. You can sleep here or choose another room. I don't care. Cecilia met his gaze through the reflection, her heart cracking. Is this really the marriage you wanted? A double life? Ethan turned to face her, his eyes unreadable. This is the life you chose. Then without another word, he walked past her and left the room. She stood there alone, surrounded by the opulence of a honeymoon suite that felt emptier than ever. On paper, they were husband and wife, but between them, there was nothing but a contract. Yet despite Ethan's relentless coldness, there were moments that unsettled Cecilia. When reporters bombarded her with ruthless questions, he shielded her, cutting through the crowd like a fortress. When she stumbled at a gala, he was the first to catch her, his grip steady and unyielding. When a sleazy businessman made an inappropriate remark toward her, Ethan didn't even need to speak. One look from him, and the man paled, retreating instantly. He didn't hate her. No matter how much he pretended, Ethan Carter still cared. But if he still cared, why was he punishing her? The answer remained elusive. But one thing was certain. This marriage would never be peaceful. Welcome to Soul Stories. Puker. Life can be overwhelming, but here we share heartfelt tales to bring you peace, joy, and inspiration. Your support, every comment, like, and follow means the world to us. It motivates us to create more meaningful and uplifting stories just for you. Did our latest story touch your heart? Leave a yes in the comments if you agree. Subscribe now and be part of a community that spreads love, kindness, and positivity. Let's make every day a little brighter together. Part 3, A Marriage of Expectations. Cecilia Lancaster stood before the towering glass windows of the penthouse bedroom, her gaze drifting over the dazzling cityscape of New York. The streets below were alive with rushing traffic, skyscrapers shimmering under the glow of a million lights. Yet everything felt distant, as if she were watching a world she no longer belonged to. Her world now was a cold, lifeless apartment. The walls were adorned in luxurious, neutral tones. Every piece of furniture was expensive, flawlessly arranged, too perfect, too soulless. Ethan Carter was never here, or perhaps he had never truly been present since the moment they signed their second marriage contract. This was no longer a union of love, it was a transaction, a binding contract that kept her tethered, while Ethan kept her, yet never truly touched her. Every night she slept alone in the vast bed, surrounded by nothing but silence and the cold emptiness beside her. He always came home late. By the time she woke up, he was already gone. She didn't know if it was intentional or not, but deep down she suspected he was avoiding her. And when they did cross paths, he barely acknowledged her. His eyes passed over her as if she were nothing but a fleeting shadow. Yet there were moments, rare, fleeting moments, when she would catch him watching her, his gaze heavy with something painful, unreadable. But the second she turned to meet his eyes, it was gone. Cecilia tried to integrate herself into Ethan's world. She attended the elite social events, standing beside him as the perfect wife. But every time she attempted to close the distance between them, he only pulled further away. At dinners, she tried to start conversations, but Ethan only responded with clipped, emotionless answers. She waited up for him at night, but he never came home until she had long fallen asleep. She knew this was his way of punishing her. But for what? Because she had left him before? Or because he still loved her, but hated the fact that he did? That evening, Cecilia wore a deep red silk gown, its elegant fabric accentuating her slender frame, as she attended a prestigious charity gala at one of Manhattan's most exclusive five-star hotels. Crystal chandeliers glittered against the high ceilings, rich velvet drapes adding an air of opulence. People laughed, clinking glasses of the finest wine, but Cecilia knew she didn't belong here. Eyes lingered on her, sharp and calculating. Whispers floated in the air, just low enough for her to hear. Her? That's the woman Ethan Carter chose to remarry? I thought he'd marry someone more powerful, a businesswoman, someone with status. What a shame. I heard they divorced once already. Maybe she's just a temporary distraction. Her throat tightened. Cecilia had never cared for gossip. But why did these words sting so much? She turned, intending to walk away, but was stopped by a woman, the wife of one of Ethan's major investors. A slow, condescending smirk curved the woman's lips. Cecilia, you seem out of place here. The subtle mockery in her tone made Cecilia's grip tighten around her wineglass. She refused to engage, but before she could respond, a cold, commanding voice cut through the air behind her. I don't recall allowing anyone here to speak about my wife. Silence fell over the room. Ethan Carter had arrived. His presence was undeniable, his tailored black suit emphasizing every inch of his powerful frame. His icy gaze swept across the crowd, sending an unmistakable warning. All eyes turned to them. Before Cecilia could react, Ethan's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her close. It was a possessive gesture, a statement. The same people who had mocked her only moments ago now averted their gazes, suddenly uneasy. If anyone has something to say about Cecilia, Ethan continued, his voice deceptively calm, I would be more than happy to reconsider our business partnerships. No one dared to respond. Cecilia's heart pounded. Ethan was protecting her. The same man who treated her with indifference, who made her feel invisible in their own home, was now defending her, shielding her in front of everyone. But when she turned to search his expression, all she found was a blank, unreadable mask. Was this duty, reputation, or something else? That night, Cecilia couldn't sleep. Her mind was restless, thoughts swirling as she wandered through Ethan's private library, a space she had never dared to enter before. It was there, hidden in a drawer, that she found it, a small wooden box. She hesitated, then slowly lifted the lid, and her heart clenched. Inside lay their old wedding ring, still gleaming under the soft light, untouched by time. Beneath it, a photograph, their first anniversary. She was smiling brightly in a white dress, while Ethan stood behind her, arms wrapped around her, his gaze filled with love. Cecilia bit her lip, swallowing back the emotions that surged within her. If he had truly moved on, why had he kept these? If he no longer loved her, why had he protected her so fiercely? She carefully placed everything back before Ethan returned. But later that night, as she watched him walk past her with those cold, indifferent eyes, she couldn't help but wonder. Was it all just an act? Had he really stopped loving her? Or was he simply hiding something? The charity gala at the Grand Royal Hotel was a spectacle of extravagance, where the city's elite gathered beneath dazzling chandeliers. Laughter, clinking glasses, and murmured conversations filled the opulent hall. Cecilia stood at the bar, her fingers tracing the rim of her wineglass as she stared at the sea of glittering gowns and tailored suits. She was waiting for Ethan. Since stepping back into his world, she had always been beside him, yet never truly with him. He stood with her when necessary, but he was never really there. Then a voice, soft yet sharp, cut through the air beside her. "How fascinating to finally meet you, Cecilia Lancaster." Cecilia turned. A woman approached, too beautiful, too perfect, as if she had been sculpted for this world. Isabelle Laurent. Her golden hair was elegantly swept back, with soft curls cascading down to frame a flawless, delicate face. Her deep red lips curved into a knowing smirk, and her piercing blue eyes locked onto Cecilia's like a predator studying prey. Cecilia recognized the name instantly, the woman rumored to be linked to Ethan. Her heartbeat quickened, but she remained composed. "You know me?" Isabel arched a delicate brow as if the question amused her. "Of course. You are, after all, Ethan's wife, at least on paper." Cecilia's body stiffened. Isabel took a slow sip of wine before letting out a theatrical sigh. "Do you really think this marriage means anything? Do you honestly believe Ethan belongs to you?" Cecilia tightened her grip on her glass, forcing herself to stay calm. "What exactly are you implying?" Isabel's smirk deepened, her eyes glittering with cruel amusement. "Ethan and I have been engaged for years." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "We are the perfect match, and sooner or later, I will be his wife." A sharp, invisible blade cut through Cecilia's chest. Engaged? Ethan had never mentioned that. Her gaze darted across the room, searching for him. And there he was, standing amidst powerful businessmen, his face unreadable. Isabel took another step closer, her voice a velvet whisper laced with poison. "Do you really think Ethan remarried you out of love?" A pause, then a cruel chuckle. "Can't you see? He's punishing you, making you suffer just as he did when you left him." The world seemed to freeze. Cecilia's breath hitched, her chest tightening. She had suspected it before, but hearing it from someone else, from Isabel of all people, made it cut deeper. Seeing the flicker of pain in Cecilia's eyes, Isabel smiled as if savoring a victory. "Your marriage won't last long," she said softly. "Ethan doesn't love you. Everything he's doing, it's just to make you hurt as much as he did." With that, she turned gracefully and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Cecilia frozen in place. The golden glow of the chandeliers suddenly felt blinding. The music, the voices, the laughter, all of it faded into the background. She stood there in the midst of luxury and wealth, but all she felt was cold, empty silence. The next morning, every newspaper and magazine was flooded with blinding headlines. Ethan Carter and Isabelle Laurent, the power couple of high society? Is CEO Carter's legal wife nothing but a shadow? Cecilia Lancaster holding on to a man who doesn't belong to her? And there on the front pages was Ethan and Isabel, standing side by side at the gala, their faces calm, familiar, effortlessly poised, like they had belonged together all along. Cecilia felt her stomach tighten as she read the words. Each sentence, each headline, cut into her like a blade. Was she truly just a pawn in Ethan's game? The lonely nights, the indifferent glances, the clipped responses. Had it all been part of his punishment for her? If he didn't love her, why was he keeping her? She couldn't take it anymore. She had to face him. Cecilia pushed open the office door, stepping inside before anyone could stop her. Ethan stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his silhouette cast against the golden hues of the setting sun. The light framed his broad shoulders, reflecting against the glass like an untouchable painting, distant, unreachable. He didn't turn at the sound of her heels clicking against the marble floor. "I don't recall you making an appointment," he said, his voice detached, unreadable. Cecilia clenched her fists, her chest tightening like a vice. "I don't care. I need answers." Finally, he turned. His dark eyes were deep as the ocean, but there wasn't even a ripple of emotion in them. "Speak." She took a shaky breath. "Isabel told me she's your fiancé. Is that true?" For a moment, something flickered in his gaze. Something dark, unreadable. But then, Ethan smirked. "You don't need to know." The words hit her like a slap. Her breath caught in her throat, her voice breaking. "Why would you say that? I'm your wife. Don't you think I have the right to know?" Ethan took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between them. He was close, too close. Close enough that she could feel his breath ghosting over her skin. But it wasn't warm. It was ice cold. His gaze bore into hers, unwavering, merciless. "The only thing you need to know," he said smoothly, "is that you signed a contract, and that contract binds you to me, not to anyone else." Cecilia stared into his eyes, searching, desperate to find even a sliver of the man she had once loved. But there was nothing. Nothing but coldness, emptiness. And in that moment, she finally understood. She was in love with a man who no longer belonged to her. Part 4. The Truth Unveiled. Rain pattered softly against the glass windows, droplets trailing down in delicate, blurred streaks. Inside the vast, yet cold and empty penthouse, Cecilia Lancaster sat in Ethan's office, staring at the documents before her, her mind in turmoil. She had never imagined a day would come when she would dig into the past she had tried so hard to bury. For years, she had believed the truth was clear. Ethan Carter had betrayed her. 4 years ago, she had seen the photos, the messages, the undeniable evidence. She was the one who had asked for the divorce. She was the one who had signed the papers, sealing their fate. But if Ethan had really been unfaithful, why had he kept their old wedding ring? Why, in those fleeting moments when he thought she wasn't looking, did his eyes hold so much pain? These questions haunted her, gnawing at her heart, until fate placed the truth in her hands. One night, while Ethan was away, Cecilia stumbled into his private library. The room was different from the rest of the penthouse, quiet, meticulously organized, untouched by anyone but him. On his dark mahogany desk, a stack of files lay neatly arranged. But what caught her eye was one document in particular. Its cover bore a bold title, Agreement between William Lancaster and Ethan Carter, dated 20/20/2020. Her heart pounded violently. For a brief moment, she hesitated. Then, with trembling fingers, she opened the file. And as she read, her breath grew unsteady. When Lancaster Group teetered on the edge of financial ruin, her father, William Lancaster, sought out Ethan Carter. At the time, Ethan was merely an ambitious young entrepreneur, a man without wealth or family prestige. And that was precisely why William Lancaster despised him. Ethan Carter was a nobody. He was not born into privilege, had no legacy to inherit, and built everything with sheer determination. A man like that was unworthy of his daughter. But the bigger problem was that William Lancaster needed a son-in-law who could save his company. And Ethan wasn't the man for the job. A more powerful alliance had presented itself. The Laurent family, an empire in the finance world. They were willing to invest in Lancaster Group, but under one condition: Cecilia had to marry their heir, or, at the very least, agree to an arranged engagement with a suitable partner. But Cecilia was already married, to Ethan. Their impulsive, love-driven wedding had no business value to her father. To William Lancaster, Ethan was a liability, an obstacle in his grand plan. So he devised a way to remove him. William Lancaster summoned Ethan to his office. There was no rage or threats, only a calculated offer placed neatly on the table. "If you truly love Cecilia, you will leave her life. If not, I will ensure that not only your career is destroyed, but your family will suffer the consequences as well." Ethan understood immediately. If he didn't leave, her father would ruin him. Not just his company, but everything he had painstakingly built. And worse, he would go after Ethan's family. There was no choice. Ethan accepted the deal. He walked away, disappeared from Cecilia's life. And in his wake, William Lancaster carefully planted evidence. Fake photographs, forged messages, a masterfully constructed betrayal, all to ensure that when Cecilia saw them, she would believe Ethan had broken her trust. A shiver ran down Cecilia's spine. She took a step back, her breath caught in her throat as her wide eyes remained fixed on the damning words before her. Words that had slashed through her heart like a blade. And suddenly the past crashed down on her. The day she saw the photos of Ethan with another woman. The day she believed the fabricated messages her father had sent. The day she handed Ethan the divorce papers, thinking she was the one who had been betrayed. But the truth was, she had been the one to abandon him. She had believed the lies. She had failed to see through the deception. Ethan had never betrayed her. He had loved her so much that he sacrificed everything. His career, his dignity, his own heart, just to protect her. And what had she done? She had pushed him away. She had believed in the father who had sold her off for a business deal. And now she was trapped in a loveless marriage, bound to a man she had betrayed, broken, and perhaps lost forever. A single hot tear slid down Cecilia's cheek. She lifted her head, staring at the vast, yet lifeless library. This room reflected her perfectly, grand but hollow, luxurious yet devoid of warmth. Just like her marriage with Ethan, just like her heart. She had made a terrible mistake, and the worst part was, it might be too late to fix it. Rain lashed violently against the car windows, each drop pounding against the glass as if trying to tear through the silence of the night. Cecilia Lancaster sat in the back of the speeding taxi, her fingers trembling as she searched for Ethan's number. She had just uncovered the truth. He had never betrayed her. 4 years ago, her father had forced him to leave. Her father had orchestrated the entire affair scandal, planting false evidence just to make her believe that Ethan never loved her. Her heart shattered. She had to tell him. Now the phone rang once, twice, 3 times, no answer. She bit her lip, her voice urgent as she instructed the driver. Take me to Carter Enterprises. Now. The rain grew heavier. She didn't care. She only knew one thing. She couldn't let him suffer another second thinking she had abandoned him willingly. But what she didn't know was that fate had a different trial waiting for her. The taxi skidded to a stop in front of the towering Carter Enterprises building. Rain poured down, bouncing off the sleek glass facade, the city lights reflecting like 1,000 shattered stars. Cecilia threw open the door and ran out. She didn't see the blazing headlights rushing toward her. A deafening horn blared. She turned, too late. A blinding flash of light, a brutal impact tore through her body. She felt herself lift off the ground, thrown into the rain-soaked pavement. Agony exploded in every nerve. Rain kept falling. The cold raindrops mixed with something warm, something thick spreading across the pavement beneath her. Her vision blurred. It hurt. She tried to speak, but all she could taste was the sharp tang of blood. And then, everything faded into darkness. At the very top of Carter Enterprises, inside the CEO's sleek and modern office, Ethan Carter sat motionless before his computer screen. For the entire day, an unexplainable unease had settled deep within him. No matter how much he tried, he couldn't focus. Then his phone vibrated on the desk. A name flashed on the screen. Cecilia Lancaster. She was calling him. Ethan stared at the phone, his fingers instinctively tightening into a fist. He didn't answer. He didn't know why. Maybe because he was afraid. Afraid that if he heard her voice, he wouldn't be able to keep pretending he didn't care. Maybe because he was still angry. Maybe because he didn't know how much longer he could endure this. But 10 minutes later, the door burst open. His secretary rushed in, her face ashen, her voice shaking. Mr. Carter, your wife, she's been in an accident. The world collapsed around him. A crushing weight clenched his chest. What? His voice was dangerously low, hoarse with disbelief. She She was hit by a car right in front of the building. They've taken her to the hospital. At that moment, Ethan Carter forgot everything. The anger, the resentment, his pride. There was only one thought in his mind. He needed to get to her. The hospital room was painfully sterile. White walls, the scent of antiseptic thick in the air. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence. Yet to Ethan, each sound was like a dagger piercing his chest. Cecilia lay motionless on the bed, her complexion pale as porcelain. White bandages wrapped around her forehead, her delicate hand resting limply against the crisp sheets. Dark bruises marred her fair skin, evidence of the pain she had endured. Ethan sat beside her, his fingers trembling as he reached for her hand. He couldn't lose her. He could endure her hatred. He could endure her silence, but he could not endure a world without her in it. For the first time in his life, Ethan Carter was afraid, terrified. What if she never woke up? The door creaked open, and the doctor entered, holding a medical file. Her condition is stable, but... The doctor hesitated, concern flickering in his eyes. Due to the impact on her head, there's a possibility she may suffer from temporary memory loss. Ethan's head snapped up, his jaw clenched, his eyes dark and unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he stood, walking toward the doctor, his voice low but resolute. Whether she remembers me or not, I will protect her for the rest of my life. The doctor looked startled by the quiet intensity in his words. But Ethan, for the first time in years, his icy mask had shattered. There was no indifference left, only pain. The pain of a man who had lost the woman he loved once and refused to lose her again. He turned back to Cecilia, his gaze gentler than he realized. His hand brushed softly against her cheek, his voice a low, desperate whisper. Cecilia, you have to wake up. I don't care if you remember me or not, but as long as you open your eyes, I will never let you go again. In the depths of unconsciousness, Cecilia heard his voice, a deep, broken voice, a voice filled with pain, raspy, raw, as if he had suffered too much. And then, something warm landed on her hand, a single tear. She felt it, and then, her fingers twitched. Slowly, her eyelashes fluttered. Her vision was blurry at first, the harsh hospital light stinging her eyes. But then, she saw him. The first thing she saw was Ethan Carter, his eyes red-rimmed, dark with emotion, filled with a pain deeper than anything she had ever seen. He looked like a man who had just come back from hell itself, and for the first time in years, he wasn't hiding it anymore. Part 4. A New Happiness. The moment he could no longer run, the rain had finally stopped. Golden streaks of sunlight filtered through the hospital window, illuminating the room with a soft glow. Cecilia Lancaster slowly opened her eyes, her lashes fluttering as she welcomed the first light after what felt like an endless nightmare. But what truly made her heart skip a beat wasn't the sunlight. It was the man asleep beside her bed, Ethan Carter. He was still in the same suit from the previous day, his dress shirt crumpled, his tie discarded carelessly to the side. Even in his sleep, his face remained tense, his brows furrowed as though he was still carrying a pain too deep to express. She didn't need words anymore. She knew the truth. He loved her. He had never stopped. He had only been too hurt, too broken to admit it, but this time she would not let him run anymore. After being discharged from the hospital, Cecilia returned to the penthouse she had once seen as a cold, unwelcoming prison. But this time, she refused to let it stay that way. She didn't force Ethan to admit his feelings. She let their old memories awaken the heart he had locked away. The first step, a familiar scent. On the first day, she went into the kitchen. When Ethan came home from work, the scent of apple pie filled the penthouse. He froze at the entrance of the kitchen. Cecilia turned, a playful smile tugging at her lips. Do you remember? This is the pie I made for your first birthday after we got married. A flicker of shock passed through Ethan's eyes, but he turned away too quickly. I don't remember. His voice was cold, but Cecilia knew. He was lying. One evening, she walked into his library where he always went to read. She picked up an old novel they had once read together, her fingers grazing the familiar pages. And she began to read out loud, deliberately choosing his favorite passage. Ethan stopped at the door. This time he didn't enter, but he didn't leave either. He simply stood there, watching her silently, his eyes dark and conflicted. Cecilia smiled. The walls he had built were starting to crumble. That evening, New York's skyline shimmered with lights, but Cecilia could only see one man before her, Ethan Carter. He had just stepped out of his office, his tall frame casting a long shadow on the marble balcony. The night wind whispered against her skin, ruffling the loose strands of her hair. But she wasn't cold, because her heart burned with one single determination: to win him back. Ethan turned to leave, but she blocked his path. "You still don't believe me, do you?" Her voice was soft, yet it carried the weight of a love that had once been lost. Ethan froze. His dark eyes flashed with something deep, unreadable. Cecilia stared at him, her gaze steady, unshaken. "Do you think I'm joking? Do you think this is just some fleeting desire that will disappear again?" She bit her lip, her hands curling into fists. Her voice cracked. "Ethan, I'm not leaving again." Silence, a silence so thick it was suffocating. She saw his fingers tighten into a fist, his shoulders tense as though he was fighting a storm within himself. She couldn't take it anymore. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms tightly around him. Her fingers gripped his vest, her face buried against his chest, where his heartbeat thundered like a war drum. She didn't let go. She felt his sharp intake of breath, the way his body stiffened, his hands trembling at his sides. 1 second, 2 seconds, and then he surrendered. Ethan Carter's grip on Cecilia's waist tightened suddenly, pulling her against him so fiercely she could barely breathe. And then he claimed her lips in a kiss that was raw, demanding, and filled with years of longing. A kiss born from pain. A kiss filled with regret, sleepless nights, and the agony of trying to forget, only to realize he never could. His lips burned against hers, taking, possessing, as if trying to reclaim the 4 years stolen from them. Cecilia was swept away in the whirlwind of emotions. She felt the desperation in the way he held her, the way his fingers dug into her skin, as if afraid she might disappear. She kissed him back, her hands gripping his shirt, anchoring herself to him. Ethan didn't let her go. He was no longer distant, no longer cold. He kissed her like it was the last time, like if he didn't touch her now, he would go mad. His tongue brushed against her lips, sending shivers down her spine, making her dizzy. His fingers tangled in her hair, gripping tightly, as if to remind himself she was real. She was here. She belonged to him. The cold wind from the balcony blew past them, but their bodies burned with uncontrollable fire. 4 years. 4 years of pain, restraint, and longing, all crashing down in this moment. Ethan finally pulled away, but he didn't release her. His forehead rested against hers, his breaths uneven, his eyes dark with emotions he could no longer hide. "You're not allowed to leave me again, Cecilia." His voice was low, hoarse, carrying the weight of all the pain he had tried to bury. Cecilia's eyes fluttered open, her heart pounding as she felt his warmth, his presence. She cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. "I promise." And in that moment, Ethan Carter knew he had lost. Lost to the only woman he had ever loved. Lost to his own heart. He didn't say anything else. He simply wrapped her in his arms again, holding her as if he could merge her into his very soul. Cecilia closed her eyes, resting in his embrace. For the first time in 4 years, she felt at peace. She had found him again, and this time she would never let him go. The first light of dawn spilled through the sheer curtains, casting a golden glow across the room. The penthouse was no longer cold, no longer empty. In the king-size bed, 2 bodies lay entwined. White silk sheets draped loosely over Ethan Carter's sculpted back, the morning sun highlighting the strong planes of his body. Beside him, Cecilia Lancaster lay nestled in his arms, her soft brown hair spilling across the pillows, her skin glowing against the early sunlight. She stirred slightly, feeling his warmth, his steady breath against her temple. It still felt like a dream. Last night they had truly belonged to each other. No more walls, no more resistance, only 2 hearts beating as one, bound together by a love that had never truly faded. Cecilia smiled, recalling the way Ethan had worshipped her the night before. He had kissed her with years of repressed hunger, touched her as if memorizing every inch of her skin, as if marking her as his once again. His lips had trailed over her body, leaving no part of her untouched, unclaimed. His hands had held her possessively, as if trying to erase the distance that had once separated them. They had come undone together, falling into each other like two souls reunited after lifetimes apart. And even after it was over, he had held her tight, refusing to let her go, as if terrified she would slip away. Now, as the morning sun bathed them in light, the remnants of the night still lingered. Cecilia turned slightly, her gaze soft as she watched the man beside her. Ethan Carter, the man who had once frozen his heart, yet now lay beside her, holding her with all the tenderness in the world. She reached out, gently tracing the familiar contours of his face, his furrowed brows, his dark lashes, the lips that had claimed hers so fiercely. She smiled. Even in sleep, he held her as if afraid she would vanish. "I'm not going anywhere, Ethan," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his, and as if he had heard her, his arms tightened around her. A moment later he stirred, his grip firming around her waist as he pulled her closer. Before she could react, he shifted, rolling her beneath him. His gray eyes, still heavy with sleep, locked onto hers, filled with something raw, something unguarded. "What did you just say?" His voice was gravelly, husky from the remnants of sleep. Cecilia blinked, her palm pressed against his solid chest. "I said I'm not leaving again." Ethan froze, and in his gaze she saw everything. The longing, the pain, the hope. And then he kissed her. Not with the same fiery intensity as the night before, but with something deeper, more profound, as if sealing her promise into his very soul, as if this, she, him, this moment, was all he ever needed. Are you still following the story? Please leave your thoughts on the story. Part 5, A Love That Could Never Be Broken. After breakfast, they sat across from each other in the living room, a familiar document lying on the table between them. The marriage contract, once a binding force, a cage that kept them together for all the wrong reasons. Ethan stared at it for a long time, then lifted his eyes to Cecilia. "We're ending this." His voice was deep, certain, unwavering. Cecilia didn't hesitate. She picked up the pen and signed it one last time. But this time, it wasn't to accept the chains that bound her. It was to end them forever. Ethan took the contract and without a second thought tore it in half. The sound of paper ripping echoed in the quiet room. Final, absolute, yet strangely freeing. Cecilia smiled softly at him, warmth radiating from her gaze. "This time I'm marrying you, not because of a contract, but because I love you." A low chuckle escaped Ethan, his hand tilting her chin up, his eyes blazing with a love he no longer cared to hide. "And this time, I'm keeping you forever." This time, their wedding wasn't about business alliances or forced commitments. This time, it was simply because they wanted it. Cecilia stood in an elegant white gown, her long hair cascading in soft waves, her lips curved in a radiant smile. Ethan stood in front of her, dressed in a tailored black suit, but today his eyes held no distance, no coldness. As the priest read the vows, Ethan didn't wait. He leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear, his voice deep and intimate. "This time you can't escape from me." Cecilia laughed softly, her eyes sparkling under the warm glow of the chapel lights. "Who said I want to escape?" Ethan didn't hold back anymore. He kissed her right there at the altar, a kiss that was fierce, passionate, a declaration that this time she was his forever. The room erupted in cheers and applause, rose petals falling around them. But for Cecilia, the world had shrunk to just the two of them. After the wedding, they returned to the penthouse, a place that had once been a cold, lifeless cage for Cecilia. But now it was home. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly as if still making sure she was really there. "I love you." This time his words weren't possessive, weren't filled with pain. They were gentle, sincere, everything he had wanted to say all these years. Cecilia smiled against his chest, closing her eyes as she listened to the steady thrum of his heartbeat. I love you too, Ethan. This time, nothing could take them apart. 1 year later, golden sunlight bathed the lush green estate, the soft breeze carrying the delicate fragrance of blooming flowers through the air. The cold penthouse was now a relic of the past. Ethan and Cecilia had built a new home together, one filled with laughter, warmth, and love. And most importantly, it was now home to two precious souls. Cecilia leaned against Ethan's shoulder, her eyes misty as she gazed down at the twin cribs beside their bed. A boy and a girl, their children. The proof of their love, their journey, their second chance. The baby boy had Ethan's jet black hair and stormy gray eyes, a miniature version of his father, except when he slept. His face held a soft innocence that melted Cecilia's heart. The baby girl had Cecilia's chestnut waves and crystal blue eyes, a tiny angel wrapped in warmth, her father's absolute weakness. Ethan reached down, his fingers lightly brushing against his son's tiny hand. The baby instinctively curled his fingers around Ethan's, gripping onto him in an unconscious promise. Ethan's chest tightened. He had never known he could love anyone this much. Cecilia watched, a gentle smile playing on her lips. The man who had once pushed her away, who had been afraid to love, now looked at his son as if he was afraid to even breathe too hard, afraid to break something so precious. She placed her hand over his, squeezing gently. You did it, Ethan. He turned to her, his gray eyes unreadable. She smiled, her gaze filled with nothing but admiration and love. You learned how to love again, and now you have a real family. Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he leaned down and pressed a lingering kiss to her forehead, a kiss that held gratitude, emotion, and a silent promise. That night, with both their children fast asleep, Ethan pulled Cecilia into bed, wrapping her securely in his arms. His fingers traced gentle patterns against her back, his lips brushing against her temple. I never thought I would have this, he murmured, his voice a quiet confession in the dark. 5 years ago, I thought I had lost you forever, but you came back. You fought for me. Cecilia held him tighter, her voice soft but resolute. It wasn't just me, Ethan. We fought for each other, and you never gave up either. Ethan took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling against hers. This past year had taught him so much. That love wasn't perfect, but it could heal even the deepest wounds. That forgiveness wasn't for others but for yourself. That a family wasn't given. It was built through trust and love. He looked down at the woman who had changed everything for him, the woman who had brought him back to life. And then he kissed her. Not because of possession, not because of pain, but simply because he loved her. When the sun rose, it no longer shone upon a lonely, cold penthouse. It lit up a home, a family, a man who had once closed off his heart, who had finally learned to love again. A woman who had once lost her way, but had finally found where she truly belonged. And two little angels, the greatest gifts love had ever given them. This time, there was no more fear of losing each other. This time, they were truly each other's, and nothing could ever change that. Thank you for following this heartfelt story. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.